A green purse soaked in blood, blonde hair torn at the root, a campus security officer who vanished the same night as a missing student. What started as a quiet walk after an argument ended with a multi-state manhunt and a chilling confession. Who was Edwin Lara, protector or predator? This is the story of Kaylee Sawyer and the deadly secret hiding behind a uniform. It began not with a disappearance, but with the discovery of something quiet, something that didn't scream, but bled. In a small wooden shed behind a modest house in Redmond, Oregon, police opened a black trash bag. Inside was a woman's purse, soaked through with blood. The contents were scattered: makeup, ID cards, personal items still clinging to the scent of someone alive. Blonde hair, tangled and torn at the root, clung to the fabric. A large stone lay nearby, caked in dried blood. There was no body, not yet. But no reasonable investigator could look into that bag and think anyone had survived what had happened. This was not a scene of panic. It was not the aftermath of an accident. Everything about it suggested control, deliberate, brutal control. The kind that does not erupt spontaneously but builds in silence, inside a person already rehearsing the act long before they commit it. At the center of that scene was a man named Edwin Lara, 31 years old, campus security guard, husband to a local police officer, a father, a man who wore a badge that bore the words public safety. But in truth, he was a predator, one who used that uniform not to serve, but to stalk, one who didn't need to hide in the shadows, because he had learned to exist inside trust. The evidence in the shed was more than forensic. It was psychological. Propped up against one wall was a school project, an elaborate poster dedicated to Angel Maturino Resendiz, the so-called railroad killer. The images were graphic. There were red handprints drawn across photos of mutilated victims, and handwritten notes referencing his methods, his mobility, and his ability to escape detection. It was not simply educational. It was obsessive, and it revealed what textbooks cannot always show: fascination disguised as study. In the context of forensic psychology, this is not uncommon. Offenders who gravitate toward law enforcement or positions of quasi-authority often do so not to protect, but to gain access, to learn procedure, to blend in. Lara was not a man surprised by his own violence. He was someone who had quietly constructed a framework for it. He had studied how to do harm, and, crucially, how to get away with it. The shed told investigators what they already feared. The missing woman, 23-year-old Kaylee Sawyer, had likely been murdered. And the man responsible had taken his time. The items were not discarded in haste. The bag had been sealed, the area organized. This was someone who believed he could maintain control even after the act. And when that control began to slip, he didn't turn himself in. He ran. But long before the shed was opened, before the blood was analyzed, and before the case reached the national spotlight, there was a night, a warm July evening, when Kaylee walked alone after a disagreement with her boyfriend. It was late, past midnight. She had asked for space. She had walked that route before, near the community college where she took classes. She likely passed by a white SUV marked Campus Safety. She likely saw a familiar face. She may even have felt relief. The question of why she entered that vehicle has no definitive answer. Perhaps she was offered a ride home. Perhaps she was ordered inside. What matters is that Lara, in that moment, had exactly what he wanted: isolation, authority, and access. There was no one else on the road. No cameras, no calls. Just him a uniform, a cage in the back of the SUV, and a woman who believed, for one final moment, that she was safe. What followed did not begin with rage. It began with domination. It began with the quiet thrill of power, of seeing someone vulnerable and knowing they had no way out. The car he drove was the only one in the fleet with a rear prisoner cage, separating the back seat from the front. Once inside, Kaylee had no escape. At some point during the encounter, Lara took her phone and purse. The act itself, in criminal profiling, is telling. Removing a victim's communication means more than eliminating evidence. It is a statement that the victim no longer has autonomy, that control has shifted. It is the beginning of dehumanization. Kaylee was restrained. Reports would later confirm signs of strangulation and injuries consistent with blunt force trauma. The presence of the rock, the one in the shed, suggested a method that was not only violent, but deeply personal. Striking with such an object requires proximity, effort. The killer must feel the resistance of bone, the breaking of skin. This was not about efficiency. It was about erasure. And afterward, when it was done, Lara didn't leave her body in the open. He placed it in a hidden ravine off a remote stretch of highway, an area he likely knew from patrol. He cleaned himself, disposed of her belongings, returned home, went to church with his wife the next morning, watched Netflix, ordered food. For a man like Lara, the act of killing did not rupture his routine. It folded into it. This is the nature of a concealed predator. They don't operate in chaos. They operate in silence. They move through structure. They follow rules until the rules are no longer useful. And when that moment comes, the shift is almost imperceptible. Kaylee Sawyer vanished on July 24th. Her life ended within hours of stepping into what she believed was a vehicle of safety. By the time the sun rose over Bend, Oregon, she was already gone. But the horror had only just begun. Before we continue, make sure to like and subscribe. It really helps us a lot. Thank you. When the morning came, the sun rose slowly over the hills of central Oregon. The sky was clear, the air quiet. But something had shifted in the atmosphere. There was no sign of Kaylee Sawyer. Her phone had gone dark. Her social media silent. Her car remained parked exactly where she had left it the day before. She had not come home. She had not called her mother. For a young woman who was never far from her family, never unresponsive without reason, it was a signal, not of absence, but of loss. Her boyfriend, Cameron, tried to retrace the night, the argument, the moment she stepped out of the car to take a walk. She'd done that before, taken space when emotions rose. It was routine, a pause to reset. He waited, then searched. But the streets had already swallowed her. The police began their inquiries slowly, as they often do in small towns where violence is a stranger. At first, there was talk of a break, of time away, a young woman sorting out her thoughts. But the hours kept passing. Friends hadn't heard from her. Her workplace hadn't seen her. Nothing had moved. Time, in cases like this, does not comfort. It corrodes. When the name Edwin Lara first entered the case file, it wasn't through witness testimony. It wasn't the result of a tip or a piece of physical evidence. It came from his wife. Isabel, a newly sworn officer, had noticed something strange when her husband returned from his night shift. He was quiet, cold, not angry, not scared, just distant in a way that felt rehearsed. She pressed him, gently at first, then more firmly. Eventually he confessed, though not to murder. He said it had been an accident. A woman had stepped in front of his patrol car. He'd panicked. He'd hidden her body. His story was simple, but it didn't hold, because the truth never does when built on fear. By mid-morning, Isabel walked into the police station and reported her husband. It was a moment of clarity, of discipline, a decision no partner should have to make, but one that spoke to a deeper sense of duty. Her voice trembled, but her words did not. Officers were dispatched to the Lara home. The shed door was opened. And from that moment, the case was no longer a search. It was an investigation. Lara, meanwhile, was gone. He had taken Isabel's service weapon, packed a small bag, and vanished. His departure was not chaotic. It was precise. He didn't leave a note. He didn't make a call. He simply stepped into the role he had prepared for. The man behind the badge had always been two people, and now the one in the shadows had taken full control. For law enforcement, the psychological profile of a suspect like Lara follows a particular trajectory. These individuals often do not see themselves as criminals. They see themselves as exceptional, above the rules that govern others. Their planning is not about avoiding guilt. It's about staying in control. Even in retreat, they are calculating, measured. And Lara was just beginning. That afternoon, 120 miles from Bend, a 19-year-old woman named Andrea May exited a retail store after a long shift. It was dusk. She was alone. She unlocked her car, sat inside, took a moment to breathe. Lara had been watching. He approached quickly, forced himself into the vehicle. Gun drawn, vest visible, voice calm. He told her to drive. Over the next several hours, he would speak openly about what he had done. He admitted to killing someone. He said it as fact, not confession. He made sure Andrea knew what he was capable of. He made sure she understood her role: passenger, captive, witness. The road stretched ahead into the deepening night, the hum of tires a constant reminder that they were moving away from everything she knew. Andrea, though terrified, remained composed. She asked no questions. She listened. She stayed alive. Lara did not rage. He did not shout. His violence came in quiet suggestions, in warnings, in the pressure of silence that follows a man who believes himself untouchable. In his mind, he had already crossed the moral threshold. There was no going back. He checked into a motel, forced Andrea to pose as his girlfriend, held her hand in front of the clerk, smiled. Behind the door, he handcuffed her to the bed, made her take pills, told her to sleep. But she stayed awake. And somewhere, just hours behind them, investigators in Bend were beginning to understand the scale of what had happened. The body had not yet been found. The town still held a breath of hope. But those who looked closely, those who read the patterns, the silence, the signs, already knew. They were not looking for Kaylee. They were preparing to recover her. Morning light crept slowly through the thin motel curtains, casting pale shadows across the bed where Andrea lay still, her wrists marked by the cold bite of handcuffs. Her body remained motionless, but her mind had not rested. She had not slept. Every second had passed beneath the weight of fear, yet her focus had never slipped. She was surviving, calculating, waiting for the moment that might come, and praying it would not be her last. Edwin Lara, meanwhile, paced quietly near the window, his eyes darting toward the empty parking lot. He had become restless. The tension that had sat dormant beneath his calm had begun to shift. The fear of being caught, of losing control, was now pushing against the delusion that had kept him composed. In moments of silence, he mumbled to himself. At others, he stared too long at Andrea, as if trying to measure how long she would remain useful to him. Eventually, he unshackled her, told her they were leaving. The car was damaged, leaking oil. He needed something else. Somewhere nearby, someone else would become the next obstacle in his flight from justice. Andrea, pulled once more into movement, knew her odds were narrowing. They left the motel together, her movements slow, rehearsed. At a gas station just off the highway, Lara spotted a family, young, distracted, loading bags into their car. A teenage boy stood near the open driver's side door. His younger brother lingered beside the rear bumper. Lara approached fast, gun in hand. There was no time to protest. The boy looked up and froze. Lara forced them inside. Andrea was pushed into the back. The car sped off. Inside that vehicle, the energy was different. The silence was heavier. Lara didn't bark orders. He made conversation. He asked the boys if they had ever thought about killing someone. His voice was steady, curious, not threatening, not unhinged, just wrong, deeply wrong. It was the tone of a man who no longer saw himself as part of the world, but as something outside it, detached from the human rules that once tethered him to consequence. After a short drive, Lara let the family go. They stepped out in silence, unharmed but rattled. He kept Andrea with him. She was his only anchor now, and perhaps the only person still within reach of his vanishing sense of control. By now, the manhunt had crossed state lines. Local departments in Oregon and California were coordinating. The FBI had been alerted. Andrea's name, once just another shift on the retail schedule, now ran alongside news tickers and urgent bulletins. She was no longer missing. She was known. Her face, her age, her description were being broadcast in real time. But none of that could reach her. She was still trapped, somewhere outside Redding, California. Lara's grip on reality began to erode. He asked Andrea to film him again. This time, he spoke more slowly. He apologized, though the words were hollow. He admitted to murder. He claimed remorse. He talked to the camera as though it were a priest, a confessional booth that might cleanse him if he simply explained enough. But every word only deepened the picture of a man unraveling. What made his video disturbing wasn't the content. It was the contradiction, the careful pauses, the controlled cadence, the subtle pride beneath the surface. It was not the voice of a man breaking down. It was the voice of a man performing, trying to shape the story before others could write it. Andrea posted the video but quietly hid it from public view. She changed the privacy settings, made it invisible. Another silent act of resistance. Another decision that would later matter. By then, Lara had already begun dialing 911, not to confess, not yet. First, to negotiate. He told dispatchers he was armed, that he had killed, that he was driving at over 100 miles per hour. He warned them not to shoot, not to hurt Andrea. He made promises. He spoke of asthma, of needing his inhaler. He mentioned his education, his job, his understanding of how the system worked. And then, finally, he said he would surrender, but only on his terms. He would pull over in Corning. Until then, the chase continued. The road hummed beneath the tires. Andrea sat motionless, eyes fixed on the horizon. The sun was rising again, but it brought no warmth. Just another day of waiting, for something to end, or for something worse to begin. As the car tore through the empty stretches of Interstate 5, a sense of finality settled over the asphalt. The sun, climbing higher now, cast pale gold across the landscape, catching the dust on the windshield, glinting against the gun resting between Edwin Lara's legs. The engine hummed steadily beneath them, a rhythm that neither comforted nor calmed. It simply carried them forward, toward something Lara had already decided could not be undone. Andrea sat in silence. Her body, though upright, was stiff from hours of forced stillness. Her thoughts came in waves, sharp and unrelenting. Every motion beside her, every twitch of his hand, sent a silent message through her nerves. Stay still. Stay quiet. Do not provoke. There was nothing to predict anymore. Lara's behavior had started to shift again, not toward violence, but toward something colder, detachment. The man who had once taken time to stage his authority was now unraveling in full view, and it was no longer a performance. He was slipping. He continued to speak to the dispatcher. His voice remained composed, but there were tremors beneath the surface, subtle breaks in tone when he spoke about being seen, about being followed. He didn't want to be shot. That much was clear, but not because he feared death. He feared interruption. What remained of his story he wanted to finish on his own terms. He told the dispatcher his name, confirmed his crimes, mentioned Kaylee Sawyer. He said her name without hesitation. And then, with the same calm he'd used all along, he said she had screamed, and that he had silenced her, not out of anger, not out of fear, but out of necessity. That word lingered. Necessity. This choice of language revealed everything. For Lara, violence had not been an accident. It was a decision made in cold calculation, disguised as panic, justified in the narrative he built around it. In the field of criminal psychology, this distinction matters. Predators who justify their actions rarely express remorse in its truest form. What they seek is not forgiveness, but validation. They don't want to be seen as monsters. They want to be understood, even if only by themselves. When officers located the vehicle just outside Corning, they followed from a distance. Lights flashing, engines low. Lara had promised to surrender, but trust, by now, had become a dangerous currency. Andrea could see the lights behind them, could feel the tension rising like heat in the closed car. She watched Lara's hands, watched his breathing. She knew that any wrong move might trigger something final. And then, with no warning, he slowed. He pulled onto the shoulder. The tires crunched softly against gravel. The car idled, then stopped. He told her to keep her hands visible, told her to be calm. She did as she was told. Outside, officers took position. No shouting, no rush. The moment was stretched thin, a fragile tether between surrender and collapse. Lara stepped out first. He moved slowly, hands raised, eyes down. He turned as instructed. He knelt. He was taken into custody without resistance. Andrea followed. Her legs shook beneath her, but she moved without hesitation. She walked backward, her hands raised high, her breath catching in the rising heat. And when the officers reached her, when they pulled her away from the car, away from him, away from the weight of that long, endless road, she did not speak. Not yet. She had made it. That was enough. Lara was placed in the back of a patrol car. His weapon was secured. The scene was cleared. But the damage, the real damage, had already been done. Not only to Kaylee, whose name still echoed in the reports, whose body had yet to be recovered, but to every person who had come too close to him and survived. Andrea, the family at the gas station, the photographer, still clinging to life. Each one marked by a man who believed himself the author of his own morality. And now, in a quiet interrogation room just hours later, Lara would begin to speak again. Not to plead, not to confess, but to control the ending. His voice calm, his words deliberate. A man not seeking justice, but recognition. A man still clinging to the narrative he'd written before the blood was dry. The room was bare. A single table, 2 chairs, and the faint buzz of fluorescent light overhead. Edwin Lara sat alone at first, his hands cuffed loosely in front of him, his expression unreadable. He had showered, changed into a gray jumpsuit. But the mask he wore, the one he had crafted so carefully over years of silence, had already been stripped away. What remained was a man who had done unthinkable things, and who now faced the slow unraveling of the only thing he still controlled, his version of the truth. When the detectives entered, they did not raise their voices. They did not corner or confront. They let the silence do its work. And slowly, carefully, Lara began to speak. At first, he repeated what he had already said in his calls. He had hit Kaylee Sawyer with his patrol car. He hadn't seen her. She was wearing black. It was dark. He panicked. He thought she was dead. But then, he said, she moved. She screamed. And so he silenced her. There was no tremor in his voice, no visible regret. Only the structure of the story laid out in pieces like a blueprint for something cold and deliberate. When the detectives asked him why he hadn't called for help, he offered no answer. When they asked why he had taken her belongings, hidden her body, and gone home to sleep beside his wife, he simply stared at the wall. But the story he told didn't hold. Not under scrutiny. The impact with the vehicle had not been fatal. The evidence didn't support it. The wounds on Kaylee's body were not those of a single blow. There were signs of restraint, signs of struggle, DNA that placed her inside the vehicle, alive, after the supposed accident had occurred. So they pressed further, asked again, and beneath the weight of evidence and silence, Lara shifted. He said he had choked her, first to stop the screaming, then because he panicked, then because she had seen his face, and then, with words measured and slow, he admitted that when she lost consciousness, he believed she was dead. But she wasn't. Not yet. So he struck her again, a rock, heavy, wet with blood, again and again, until she stopped moving. He said he didn't know why he did it, but that wasn't true. The words betrayed him. In that small room, surrounded by the quiet breath of consequence, Lara confessed not to an accident, but to a need. He had wanted control. He had wanted power. And when Kaylee Sawyer tried to resist him, he extinguished her voice the only way he knew how. In criminal psychology, this is a turning point. The admission of desire, not fear, not mistake, but intent. Lara's confession was more than evidence. It was insight into how a man could wear a badge and harbor fantasies of dominance, into how he could learn about killers, study their methods, and eventually join their ranks. He described where he had left her body, off a remote highway where no light reached the brush. He recalled the curve of the road, the distance from the gravel shoulder, and when investigators arrived, her remains were there. The green purse, the signs of trauma. The girl who had walked into the night, believing in safety, now returned to the daylight, broken and still. At trial, the confession would be challenged. Legal technicalities would keep parts of it from being heard. But there was enough. The physical evidence, the videos, the surviving victims, the patterns. Lara was sentenced to life without parole. The courtroom was quiet as the verdict was read. Kaylee's family sat in stillness. They had not come for closure. There is no such thing. They came for acknowledgement, for weight, for the record to speak clearly and forever that what had been taken would not be forgotten. Outside, the sky was overcast. The wind moved softly through the trees that lined the courthouse. Somewhere, near Bend, the college roads were quiet again. The patrol cars returned to routine, and a law, Kaylee's law, was being written to make sure uniforms could never again be mistaken for protection without oversight. But those who knew her, who remembered her laugh, her ambition, her kindness, they did not return to routine. They carried what remained, a memory, a warning, a name that will not be erased.